I sort of had a health scare when I was 18. This could be a small thing that doesn't matter all the way to the worst thing possible. I genuinely thought, wow, I actually don't have that much time left. Recruiters organically started knocking on our door. We are making like 100 plus hires a month at some of the best companies like Cursor, Windsurf, Decagon, Palantir, Ramp. I think the average salary being 7 figures is actually like not too far away.
Before we get into Perform, I am curious with one other thing. Welcome to the Kickstart podcast. On this episode, we have the pleasure of hosting John, who is the co-founder and CEO of Perform, a marketplace startup that connects companies with expert recruiters. Previously, he was the co-founder of Ruler Network, a company that helped college grads get top jobs at top companies before it got acquired. John, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. Excited to be here.
Excited for you to be here too. So I guess, John, before we get into the exciting things that you guys are working on at Perform, we'd love to kind of give the audience more of just context of who you are. So for people who are unfamiliar with your background, would you just mind sharing a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm John, one of the founders and CEO of Perform. Yeah, I guess like my background, I grew up all over the world. I was born in Seoul, South Korea, and then moved to multiple different countries like Singapore, lived in LA for a bit. Most of my life, I actually grew up in Australia, so in Perth and Sydney specifically. And yeah, I think like growing up, yeah, not only like moving around a lot and meeting different people shaped a lot of who I am, but also I think I always liked building, solving problems for people around me, and also like, like business sense of like just charging people for it. I would typically say, hey, like if I do this for you, would you pay me X? I think that was like always like something that I remember I did growing up. And then, yeah, I studied mechatronics robotics in college at the University of Sydney. And yeah, just really liked it. I thought that's what I was going to do after graduating. And then COVID happened. And, all these labs or things like you do in person just like wasn't possible for a while. Australia had very, very strict lockdown. So college became very underwhelming quickly. Like if you try to do like Arduino or something over Zoom, it's not a good experience. So at the time, my roommate, his name is Wayne, he actually joined our company leading the supply side of the marketplace, which is great. But, him and I decided to start a company together. And similar pattern, like we just wanted to solve problems for people around us. And at the time, especially university, a lot of people just wanted to get into like these top consulting firms and investment banks. And that's what they would talk about all the time. So we thought, okay, how do we help them? And one of the things that was interesting was this idea around how do we connect them with their upperclassmen who got into the dream companies that they've gotten before. So it was just like a simple matching thing where we would like help them prep for their interviews, do some referrals. But I think the LinkedIn kind of consumer play worked really well and we were able to scale that very quickly. So we expanded to like multiple different countries like Hong Kong, Singapore, and helped like a lot of people just get incredible jobs. And yeah, a company called Crimson, which is like a bigger startup, they're like a Series C or D ad tech company, acquired us and also hired us. So I was a director of product there for 1 year, scaling Ruler to different audiences with the distribution they had. And that ended up being the fastest growing team and product in that company's history, I believe. And just learned a lot working with the team, learned a lot about like having a good sales team, like a good sales force globally. What is the dynamics, interpersonal dynamics of working within a company. Learned a lot from their founder and CEO, Jamie, just like his leadership, how he thinks about, growth, all of that. And then, yeah, I was traveling back and forth, and I met my co-founder on a trip to the US. So quick intro on him. He grew up here in Philly and then he studied at CMU and he worked at Cruise on the mapping team. And yeah, basically that's kind of how the story kind of leads up to Paraform, but I don't know if you have any questions or anything. Yeah.
I actually do have a couple. So number one, out of all the countries that you lived in previously, John, which one's your favorite and why?
Which one's my favorite? I mean, by far San Francisco. Like there's no,
Ooh.
I think there's like no, like I wouldn't hesitate for a single second. I think it's like a few things for what we're doing and for the person I am. I think it's like a really amazing city. The collective ambition in this small, whatever few mile radius is incredible, right? It's just really unmatched. I think obviously Sydney is beautiful. I really just have so many fond memories in Australia. But I think one thing is I've always noticed that when you try to do things that are a little bit like outside the status quo, there's this thing think like Australians like to say it's kind of like called the tall poppy syndrome. Basically, if in a poppy field, if like one stands out too much, you kind of cut it out. I think that's like very, not to say that the startup ecosystem there is not good. I mean, like there's amazing companies like Canva and Atlassian and Linktree, these companies that came out of it, and amazing, like talented, smart people. I don't think the talent density per se is like bad, but it's just more, I think, how big can you dream and how ambitious you can be, I think seems to be like sort of affected by the environment. So like if it wasn't for that, probably Sydney is, it's a top contender for sure, but I think San Francisco is good. And not to mention like it's just like a beautiful place, right? I think it's like one of the most beautiful places in the world, like as well. So yeah, by far here.
That's actually interesting. I had no idea about that, about Australia. And I guess my second question, John, is like, where did this like urge, or the younger version of John who wants to build, where did that really come from? Have you always been like that? Do you have parents that are entrepreneurial? Were some of your close friends entrepreneurial? Did you kind of get into like that intrigue or fascination with building businesses at a young age? Like how did that happen? Where did that energy come from?
Yeah, great question. I think I always had a lot of energy, like just like, typically I would be the ones like sort of causing a scene at like preschool or like getting in trouble, a lot of detentions, like, and I have a twin sister. So there's like a direct comparison. And like typically my mom would spend like 90% of her time on me just because she had to. Otherwise, like, it would just be a difficult time. So I think I just always had a lot of energy. I think the idea around like building, helping other people, like, sort of having like trying to make a business out of something was just, I think, something inherent. My parents aren't entrepreneurs. My dad, he worked at the same company for nearly 30 years. He had a very good career, but it was very like stable. He thought about the family first and things like that. My mom was an artist before she had to stop what she did just because she had twins, and that became her priority. But yeah, very like stability seeking family, sort of classic Asian parents. I think it might have come from me moving around a lot, just like, being open to like new things. But I think it was always very inherent. What I can share is I think although I had those traits in me, I don't think I was living on the timeline I'm living on today. So things were a little bit slower. Like I thought I had a lot of time. So when it comes to, okay, what I want to achieve in the next 10 years or thinking about like the future, that timeline in retrospect was very slow back in the day, even though I was very energetic in things. But what really sped things up and really just made me intensely obsessed about what I'm doing was I sort of had a health scare when I was 18. And, TLDR, it's all fine. So it's sort of like a blessing in disguise, I think. But basically went on a trip to Japan with like my high school friends and just being reckless, like in the winter, just like, didn't take care of myself. And I had like basically like a very bad like lung situation going on for a while, and just went to get like a scan, and turns out there's like something there. And again, fast forward, it wasn't anything. It was just like a scar from when I was young, but it definitely scared me. Like I remember going into the hospital and everyone around me, they were like probably 75 plus. Like they were just like, all, clearly like I wasn't in the right place. Firstly, I just turned 18, or I was like around 18. They kind of print out a receipt and it was like cancer center, like 18, like John, like it just scared me, I think. And when we got the results, the doctor kind of said like, hey, like, I think the way he phrased it too, he kind of said this could be anything, like he doesn't know, which is like even more scary. He's like, this could be a small thing that doesn't matter all the way to the worst thing possible. And I think it really was like a huge wake-up call. I think I got into, the college I want to, I things were fine, but I never had the urgency, I think, before that. And I genuinely thought, wow, I actually don't have that much time left, potentially. So what do I want to do in life, and how do I do that as soon as possible? I think really kicked in that moment, and really things started changing. I started thinking about my life differently, what I want to do. So I think whatever was inherently within me kind of came out almost that day. And like I had to do those scans every 6 months, and 3 years later, it turns out it was nothing so great, but I already was rewired, right? And then I think doing an internship at Tesla also like influenced a lot of how I think about things. It made me realize, like, it's when the Model 3s were like shipping globally, they opened their Shanghai factory, it was just really scaling. And I think at that moment I realized entrepreneurship and starting a company is actually one of the best ways to influence, like the world and, achieve your vision. I thought it was a good vehicle to do that. So I think that's really when those two two things, I think combined, I think led me to be on this journey. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think any health scare will be a pivotal moment in anyone's life. And it seems like that was a very important catalyst and tipping point for you. Just like maybe your life was going one way and just kind of got you on a different track. And here you are today. What would you say is like your biggest motivator? Like, what's your North Star now? Is it to impact and influence? Like, what gets you up out of bed every morning?
Yeah. If you talk about what gets me up every morning today, I mean, it's just I think the sheer responsibility of like what we have to do. Like, I really think there's two things, right? Like, one, I think we're super like fortunate to be doing what we do. Like, Jeff and I always discuss, but, we found a good market. We're incredibly proud of the team we built. Capital hasn't been an issue. Like, obviously fundraising, went well. All of these things I think are there. And if things don't work out, it's like, it's really on us. And that's like that's like definitely very empowering. It's just the amount of responsibility we have. Like, we have everything going for us, but it's not going to be easy. And we just, if we screw up, it's like, it's our fault, right? Like, I think that's like incredibly like motivating to me, that everything is within our control and it allows us to execute. I think the second thing is both my co-founder and I, but also like the team in general. I think a lot of people tend to underestimate how difficult things are. And I think that can be a good thing, like confidence, right? Like, hey, like, we can do this. But I think like there's like a very big respect around how difficult things actually are. Like, we don't underestimate how difficult what we want to achieve is. And I think that's also very motivating. And I think just like, yeah, our users, the recruiters that depend on the platform and our team every day, that number is growing so quickly. And I think we have a very big responsibility for our recruiters. And I think second thing is like the customers we're helping. I mean, the hires we're making for them aren't just like normal hires they can make in other places or through other services. Like, they really depend on us. And these are like mission critical hires. I think the hires we're making are some of the most difficult roles to fill in the United States. And I think the difficulty actually correlates to the importance of it, right? Obviously you guys know who our customers are. You've seen it firsthand, but it's just like the sheer amount of impact we're making for them. I think that makes me wake up in the morning after like 3 hours of sleep. It doesn't matter. It's just like, you have to get it done. I think when it comes to what like inherently motivates me, again, like I kind of like go back to a story when I was in Australia. So when I first started college, the engineering classes I took were very like low level. So like C++, assembly, very like robotics related. So very different to like full stack, like software engineering or web apps, right? But I kind of quickly realized that the cycle to actually like building something and getting it out to real users is like really difficult in hardware. So I kind of like dabbled with like mobile engineering, things like that, try to like learn different things in my own time. And I was obsessed about like this like productivity app that I wanted to make, like classic, just like, college kid idea again. And I kind of like learned everything from scratch, and like I would delay my assignments, like my GPA would tank a little bit, but I was just really obsessed with this app. It was like a time strip, kind of like schedule your day type of thing. And I remember one day, like I was on a train in Sydney, like there's a lot of like, you kind of go around on trains and stuff and buses. And I remember I was so consumed with the idea that one day I looked up and I was like, wow, like what time is it? Like I just like, I didn't even know what's going on. And I remember I had this feeling where it was like the end of day, everyone was finishing work. And I was like, wouldn't it be like, I think one of the best feelings ever would be if everyone just ended their day using the app that I made, by saying they kind of completed their to-do list. And that really motivated me. That the rush of feelings I felt in that moment, I still remember the exact moment. And I think another thing I thought about was, I guess I'm here and like, does it, like, it actually didn't matter to me if they knew who made the app or that it was me. Like, honestly, like, I don't think that matters like as much. I think like what matters is the fact that like everyone used it and like this like universal impact and the change we can create. I think things like financial upside or just achieving personal goals and my growth all is like a function of doing that. Can we, whatever vision we have about the future of talent, labor, and recruiting, can we make that happen? Everything else is just a function of that. So I think what really motivates me is just universal impact. Like, I want Paraform, we want to be hiring mechanical engineers in Italy, we want to be hiring, salespeople in Indonesia. Like, I think our goals are just universal impact. And I think that's what motivates me a lot. Yeah.
That was just a very refreshing kind of just testament to who you are, John. I think it's very refreshing to talk to someone who, and of course, I would love to dive a lot deeper to Paraform here, but the amount of tremendous success you've had at such a condensed amount of time is astonishing. It's really great. But then the fact that you're still humble and you have low ego and you're really doing it with the right reasons. Like, it's all about doing things correctly, having an impact on our end users, and really making making that first, making the users and product and the positive impact first. And then if everything else happens, that's a function of it, right? I think it's very easy for any founder to find a little bit of success, and now they just lead with like the ego and they want their face everywhere and stuff like that. So I think with me, it's just really honestly great to hear someone like yourself to be able to kind of really just vocalize that, because I think that's refreshing and more founders should be like that. Before we get into Perform, I am curious with one other thing though. What are your thoughts to the statement, to be successful founder, especially at a venture-backed company like yours, you got to have like really good previous startup experience and also really good enterprise experience, a little bit of both, so that you can kind of like, understand the context and like, what it's like to be able to work in a more nebulous, chaotic environment like a startup, but then you know exactly how to transition to more of a structured environment. So my question to you is, when your first startup with Wayne, right, when you guys got acquired and absorbed by a larger company, was there ever like, hey, I should just stay here a lot longer just to kind of understand how a bigger company operates? Or like when you entered at Tesla, it's like, oh, maybe I just want to work for a Tesla for like 5-10 years. Or does none of that matter? It really comes down to like the individuals, the founding team themselves, their work ethic, their capability to execute and implement, and whatever happened before doesn't matter. So what are your thoughts to that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question.
Like in retrospect, would you have done anything differently, basically?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I know a lot of people, especially like the candidates we interview, when I talk to them, like, hey, like, what made you stay here this long versus here? Like, what are you optimizing for? I think those questions are very common, right? Like, hey, in order to be a founder, I want to learn this, I want to learn that, and have all these things under my belt to be able to like do what I do. I think a lot of those stories, that people share saying like, hey, like I worked at this company before and that like sort of helped me become who I am and then, become a successful founder. I think it's almost like a narrative based on like the results, and like you kind of go back and say, oh, maybe it was because I did enterprise sales at Snowflake. Not like because they did enterprise sales at Snowflake, they like were able to do that. That's my personal view. And I think like narratives are sometimes like you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. I think what's most important, I'm sure there are learnings that happened, both through my first company and working at a bigger company as well. There definitely was. But I think you can pick those things up in whatever environment you're in, even if you're in a completely different industry. I think just being hypersensitive and aware of learning opportunities around you and like almost like actively, consciously knowing that you're learning real time. Like if you just have that kind of mindset, I think it doesn't really matter like what role you're doing. And I think everything else can be learned. The most successful companies, often, like there's like founders who just like, dropped out of college, like didn't like, then that shouldn't make any sense, right? And I think just the raw ability to like continually learn and like almost unlearn, learn, and continue to evolve, I think is like the most important thing. But of course, certainly like my previous experience like helped. Like, for example, like with sales, I've never done sales, but I think we picked like a very difficult market and a hard idea for our first company. So we were like almost like forced to like sell like a really expensive product to like a very, very like cheap audience, and that kind of honed our sales skills, right? So I'm sure like things like that helped. But I feel like if you're good at learning, the small amount of traction and conviction you have in your company should be enough. So I don't think it should deter anyone. And I think almost always you're like kind of already too late when you like act on things, right? So I think like when you have the hunch of like you want to start a company, you want to do it, I think there's two things, like really deeply reflecting whether you want to take that journey, because it is not easy, right? Like it's like, if you're just motivated by the sake of building a company and doing something, it won't last very long. It's so difficult that if you don't absolutely are insanely obsessed in love with what you do, it's like only a matter of time before it gets hard, right? So I think the two things is maybe like reflecting deeply and playing the scenario of, am I ready for this? Being super self-aware and honest to yourself. And two, getting ready to like learn at an unprecedented pace, because, all these things happen. So I think those two things matter most. Yeah.
Super important to be proactive.
And I want to also dive a little deeper into something you mentioned just a moment ago, John, about a decision of some people like, do I drop out of school for XYZ startup or to do my own thing? And so two questions. One, I know you mentioned the startup that you and Wayne co-founded together. It sounded like that was around the college time. So firstly, did you, one or both, drop out for that company? And then second follow-up question to that too is yes or no, like what kind of went into that thinking and kind of decide, is this the right opportunity? Is this the right call? A lot of times you don't know that answer in the moment, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. We did not drop out immediately when we started the company. It was like a little tapering down. So, when we first started, we were fully doing school together. It was a lot, but, we thought that was the right thing to do. And then like slowly, like as we got more traction, we like, our college offered the opportunity to do like part-time, just like take a few courses, like reduce your course load or like skip a semester, things like that. And eventually for my case, for both of us, they kept telling us to come back. back, but like we kept saying we want to defer more. And yeah, I think we kept doing that until eventually they were like, hey, like, you deferred like 3 cycles, we just can't. So we kind of got kicked out, if anything, like rather than dropped out. Yeah, I think that's what happened. I think another thing that helped is, of course, like we obviously had to make sure things were working. And I think with the exit, I mean, it wasn't like a life-changing amount or anything, but it was definitely enough to like be independent of our parents and family. And, can we like do what we do? Like, are we set up to do what we do next very well? Wayne and I had a long discussion. So that obviously helped. And I think at Crimson, we were able to like get that. Yeah, I think that was what went into the decision. In terms of like people thinking about whether they should drop out or not, yeah, again, I don't think there's like a equation to this. My personal opinion for college is I think getting in and experiencing is like almost more important than graduating itself. I think, why do you go to college? You go to, I think, make lifelong friends and connections, like, and learn in social settings, learn by completing a really, really difficult course and learning a little bit of grit, like, things like that, right? But I think unless you're in like a very specialized profession and you have a clear track, you want to get into research or something, I don't know that. I mean, typically, like most people who are great engineers say they learn CS fundamentals in college, but everything applicable they learn sort of afterwards, like during work, right? So that's my view personally. Like, I don't think you have to complete college to be a founder per se, but I definitely would not want to go to a doctor's appointment and find out that they dropped out. So I think that's like a difference, right? Yeah.
Yeah, time and a place for everything, right?
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about Paraform. It's interesting how Ruler Network and Paraform, both of these companies revolved around talent in some way or in some sort of matching capability. So can you kind of share with us, again, to the audience, what is Paraform, right? Can you kind of define Paraform, your mission? And can you also just bring us back to the early days? So you said that you just by serendipity bumped into your co-founder. Like, what did the early days look like? Did your co-founder basically create the MVP? You guys do it together? And then how did you know you had an aha moment like, hey, this product works. We're finding a little stickiness with the market here, and let's grow this thing. So if you can share some of the context of the early days, I think that'd be really intriguing for the audience.
Yeah, I can kind of start on the founding story and then maybe go into what Paraform is. In terms of like it being related both in the talent space, I think a lot of people ask me that again, like, oh, your experience doing Ruler, did that help a lot with, and then like, is that that is like not the case, but it's just like, I think it's just a matter of like, what are people around us experiencing? What is their number one problem? And it both times happen to be in this. I think it kind of speaks to the universal nature of this problem. Recruiting is a problem as old as time, right? Like, I mean, back in the medieval ages, like if you want to, I don't know, go to war, you have to get a team, right? If you want to do anything, you like working with people on some kind of goal. Like it's a problem as old as, and it's the most important problem in the world, right? So I think that's kind of maybe why serendipitously those two aligned. But yeah, in terms of the founding story, we met, and it was actually myself and like Jeff and a few others who that went to school with Jeff, but ultimately like we were the ones who kind of like decided to continue and really build a company. Again, it kind of goes back to, we were very set on solving a really difficult problem that creates a lot of value, one, and two, like, who are the people around us? Well, like we were at a co-working space and most people were like founders, and so we went around asking the question, what is your number one problem and how much would you pay us to solve that today? And they would say something like 80% of them probably said hiring founding engineers and like 30K plus. And our mind was blown, right? It's like, it costs that much. Like, why? And we kind of discovered more about the market. So that's the problem, right? The problem is to help companies hire very important roles that are difficult to fill. There are many solutions that can solve that problem. So we went through all these solutions and iterated. One of them was we built like a Twitter scraper to, given a Twitter like link, it would spit out like LinkedIn profile, phone number, email, all of these things. And that was cool. It worked quite well, actually. We could find signals that you couldn't on LinkedIn. And we had this goal, I remember Jeff and I talking about it, where, okay, let's use this tool and make 5 hires each this year, because that's kind of like our previous salary or something along those lines. And 2 months in, we made 0 hires. It was so difficult. Like, you guys know this, like how difficult recruiting is. And because we weren't recruiters, we didn't know that. And then we found this like appreciation for how difficult recruiting is. And we kind of dug into why. And like, we learned a lot of our intuition, how recruiters work, the tools they use in the market by like being recruiters ourselves almost, right? And then the second iteration was, okay, well, this doesn't scale and we're very impatient people. Like, we want to like, we I mean, I think a big reason why we were able to grow, be one of the fastest growing companies in the last 12 months is because of this sort of like, okay, what's next, right? And I think like we had to find a way to make these hires. And our customers, the initial customers we had, the founders, they still haven't made a hire. So, okay, like case in point, like it is difficult, right? The next thing we tried was when we were talking to a lot of our potential users, they kept saying how employee referral programs was the number one channel for them, both from an offer acceptance perspective and quality. So we were like, oh, okay, let's put 1 and 2 together. Like, how can we help our customers run employee referral program? But you can't really do that when you have a team of 3 and you quickly run out of your own network. So the idea was, let's build a referral marketplace where companies like startups could post a referral bonus. You know how on LinkedIn people say 20K to refer your friend, that kind of thing. And then anyone can come refer their friend. And if they make the hire, they make the bounty is what we called it. TLDR, it just like didn't work. I think in hindsight, it makes a lot of sense. It's one of those ideas where it feels like it should work, but it's like really difficult to pull it off because I think we both overestimated how well connected people were. And we also overestimated how much people just give a shit, right? I think like, you know, if I asked you, well, I guess like you guys are different because of recruiters and that's like the next step of the story I'll explain. But if I ask my friend, do you know any staff level Android engineers in New York City? Like maybe one, but they just joined like Ramp or something. So it's like, you know, it's hard to actually make that connection. And second, you care if it's your own company. Like Dropbox ran an incredible referral bonus program, Scale AI as well. You care. There's like some interpersonal social dynamics of like bringing your friend. And when you pitch your company, they actually trust you and it's like, hey, we can work together. But imagine pitching to your already lukewarm network from high school or something and being like, hey, I have a job for you. And it's like, okay, how do you know that company? It's like, oh, I don't. Like it just doesn't make any sense, right? It was very mercenary. And there was no retention. Like people were like, wow, this is really cool. Refer one person and just leave. And I think we made the classic mistake of building everything before validating. So we had a perfectly well-working marketplace, payments, submission portal, review portal, everything was there. So we had 2 things. We had the kind of infrastructure and technology, and then we had the demand, which is the customers, but we just didn't have the supply and we just couldn't figure out that problem. And again, we had this moment of, okay, like we're not scaling. What do we do? And at the time, recruiters organically started knocking on our door, you know, independent recruiters, recruiting agencies, larger agencies too, and said, hey, like we can fill these roles. And initially, like I will have to say we were skeptical just because we're not recruiters ourselves. And we were like, okay, like who is this audience that we never met and work with? But fast forward to now, obviously, given, you know, what's going on now with Paraform, like it was a great moment. And it makes sense. Recruiters are much better connected than most people, as you guys know. And actually the network is a lot warmer than like your personal network. In fact, I think you have this professional excuse to stay in touch, right? Hey, like I have a job for you. I'm a recruiter. Like that really, I think, drives a lot of this too. And then, you know, they're consistent, they're financially incentivized, it's a profession. All these characteristics of a great supply side of the marketplace were there. And it was just there in front of us. And we full pivoted to a recruiter marketplace. And things really started working then. Of course, in between, there was a lot of design decisions we made and a lot of talking to users. Like it was really difficult to even to a point where one recruiter trusted the platform and uses it. And there's like so many things we can talk about there. But I think the first year, maybe the first year and a half actually was very slow. Like we were making maybe a couple hires a month, like not even, like it was very slow. And then fast forward to now, you know, we are, you know, just like creating so much impact. I think we are making like 100+ hires a month at some of the best companies like Cursor, Windsurf, Decagon, Palantir, Ramp. Again, these really difficult companies, there are 100+ new hires are being created and that's rapidly growing. So I think, yeah, that's kind of like the story where we are. Happy to dive deeper more into like Paraform, how it actually works and everything, but yeah.
Yeah, so I guess for the audience who are unfamiliar, what is the value Paraform's giving to companies that are hiring? Like, and what is the value that you're giving to recruiters?
Yeah, so I think on the company's side, you know, I think this is like a question where you can ask like, okay, why do recruiting agencies exist? Like, why have they existed for so long? Like this concept of outsourcing recruiting, it's a $700 billion revenue industry globally. And I think there's like really 2 camps we kind of think about. One is people who kind of don't have internal talent teams, like so like early stage companies, maybe Series A, Series B, they need to really ramp up and it's kind of their only option. And then companies start thinking a little bit more about, okay, hiring is becoming more repeatable. We need to bring things in-house, which makes sense. I think, you know, 80% of our customers customers have in-house recruiters, like it's not a conflict at all. In fact, it's like a tool that we should like collaborate. And then as they become more enterprise, like, and they start growing the company, the roles that are open split into different things. Like there's like their intern and grad programs, there's the evergreen pipelines, and then there's like the execs roles. And then there's like roles in between where it's like projects that come up. It's like, oh, we're launching a new team. Like it's really difficult. No company ever has successfully predicted headcount, and let alone like the talent team's headcount, right? Imagine like a company, I don't know, like Robinhood, or like, hey, like we want to do more things with AI and like we need to hire a team and we need to hire like 300 people this year. But what about once you hire all of them? Like it's really hard to resource recruiting. It's inherently being on demand has its own merits. And I think that's where Paraform comes in, right? It's like we are your trusted partner, depending on whatever recruiting needs you have, to help. And the really beautiful thing about this is really that, that the recruiters are involved. I think just one thing before I go into the recruiter side, virtually I think every company in our space is thinking about how do we replace recruiters. Like there's strategy meetings, every engineering decision and product decision is about how do we like get rid of recruiters, frankly, and how do we like automate them? How do we, that's like the narrative right now. And we're quite literally doing the opposite, right? And yeah, like, I mean, there's many reasons for why we think differently. The number one reason we think that is we actually think as AI rapidly gets better and takes over a lot of the labor, so to speak, I actually think a recruiter's influence in the future will grow exponentially as well. I think most people think their influence will decrease, but we can kind of get into that too. But anyways, like, we just have like a very recruiter-centric view into what we're doing, and it's very different to most companies, and most people actually disagree. But I think, we can kind of get into that. But anyways, the recruiters on our platform, I think they come for the clients. So, as a recruiter, you go to our platform, you see a lot of these roles. So they come for the BD, they come for the clients, but I think they stay for the workflow and the tools, sort of realizing that they can actually like earn more, on this platform if you combine it with like your own business and resources, right? I think that's kind of the value prop for recruiters. Imagine being an independent recruiter who's starting out. You were really good at recruiting, but you're stuck, like you don't get any clients. Imagine like being able to partner with the best companies in the world and do what you do best, which is recruiting, right? And then imagine like a recruiting boutique firm. Obviously I have no doubt that they have their ability to get their own clients and everything, but imagine being able to hire an infinite amount of recruiters on your team and being able to scale your business without worrying about stability. I think it really comes down to that, right? Paraform has, hundreds of roles to fill like today that like they can like, it's just like, we've grown to a point where there's just this constant demand that you can rely on. So what we're seeing is a lot of recruiters and agencies on our platform are not only becoming full-time, but they're actually scaling themselves, scaling their business. They're building businesses on top of Paraform and like 5xing their billings. Imagine being able to do that. And ultimately, if you are a person who has a good network of candidates and you have the ability to source and be a good recruiter, imagine having as many destinations to send them as possible. It's kind of like an inventory problem, right? It's like you have a lot of inventory, good inventory, and like your inventory and supply chain is only as good as how many destinations you can send them, and you become a more efficient matchmaker. And I think all the tools we're building for recruiters, everything we're doing is like really accelerating that, right? So I think the value prop is very clear for both sides. And I think there's something really nice about how really the only people can fill these roles are these recruiters. And we're almost like thinking about how do we like make recruiters really efficient, build co-pilots for them, and build all these tools to make them better. And I think we're building almost like an economy, of these talent acquisition professionals and companies. So yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like Amazon sellers, good old days at the start. But what I'm curious about, John, is like, I think while that sounds great, while I think a lot of audience here, they could be running boutiques, larger teams, independent recruiters. There's probably not like a lot of same platforms out there like Perform, but maybe similar, maybe different variations like splits and stuff. So I think like a lot of the concerns that some recruiters might have is like, okay, cool. So I come to Paraform, I have access to like really great new roles, stability, that sounds great. But how do I also know that like I can achieve success, right? That's what recruiters want at the end of the day. And how do I know that the platform has our recruiters' interests first and foremost, while many platforms prioritize the companies, right? So what are your thoughts to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I go back to like the first year we launched and what we actually had to do to even get to this point. Recruiters' trust is everything to us. Like we work so hard to earn it, both on the engineering side and the go-to-market side of working with recruiters. Like that's like the number one North Star metric, right? It's like how recruiter trust. I think there's many things that need to be true for them to think this is like for this to be good for them, right? We often think about, how the hiring manager's response times and the relationship relationship. Like, it's just a futile effort. It's just like you're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. Whereas like if you actually have like, good hiring manager feedback, good feedback cycles, like fast feedback, then, it becomes infinitely easier to fill the role. And I think for whether we like prioritize recruiters or not, I don't know. I think the choices we made over the past 2.5 years hopefully reflect that to anyone who used it. Of course, the platform is also going through a growth spurt, and there's, it's not always perfect. Like there's a lot of things that we have improved, but also need to improve. But I think at every step of the way, like I can tell you, like product meetings, engineering meetings, like it's always about like recruiters. We're probably the group of people in the United States that like talk about and think about recruiters like the most. Like I don't think that's like an understatement. I think like we truly just, that's all we think about. And there's a lot of things, like for example, I think a lot of recruiters initially were maybe skeptical, like, hey, like what happens with like the data, like how do I make sure we own the client, candidates, how do I think of like, am I getting paid, like all these like very rudimentary questions where we obviously were like, why are you doubting us about this? Because like clearly that's not the case, but we have to earn that trust, right? So one good example of this is we worked on this feature where basically candidates are recommended like similar roles. When a recruiter submit a candidate to the platform, we actually recommend to the candidates as well, like, hey, like these are great to see you're working with Preston, these are actually very similar roles that you might be interested in. And a lot of recruiters were like, oh, wait a second, like where does that put me? Like how does this work? To us it was very obvious. Like we made the decision to not let them apply directly but express interest, right? Like that's like a clear, like for example, like example of choice of when we make design decisions, who are we optimizing here? And it's always sort of recruiters, right? Like the candidate can't actually directly apply to those companies that we recommend. They have to express interest for the right ones. That pings the recruiter, and then you also should vet whether they're a good fit and whether this is the right decision for them. I mean, what is the role of a recruiter, right? People think it's like a lot of it's like resume farming, coordinating interviews. That's absolutely not the case, right? A recruiter's role is to sell the candidate, to screen them, to give them advice, what's like good or bad, and like really get rid of the noise in recruiting. I think a recruiter's role is to get rid of the noise in recruiting, right? So it's like, that's like one example of the design choices we made where we're just recruiter obsessed. And other things like, like I think the majority of the like fees that are actually being made, it's like it all goes to the recruiter. I think traditional splits are like 50-50 or less. And if you work at an agency, most of your billing kind of goes to the firm, not you. We're like completely opposite, right? The majority of the billings that come from the client actually go to the recruiter. We take a small cut to like run the platform, things like that. But I think that's one other really obvious thing where we were obsessing over recruiters. And just like the amount of like tools that we built, like I think collectively the tools that we've built, if you use all of them, because they're all free, saves you like $1,000 a month in like recruiting like tool fees. So like, and our tools are only going to get better. We like even like have like email credits that you can use, things like that. So I really do think that's our North Star, just like recruiter trust.
What about the concern about competition, John, about like over a certain role, right? Because recruiting is already just hyper competitive as is. Like if my agency engaged with a company directly, already assuming they're probably engaging with 3 to 5 other recruiters. So on a platform like yours, what if they have that same concern? And what if instead of like competing against 3 or 5, they're competing against like 10, 20, 30? Is that ever an issue? Will that ever become an issue? And what are you guys doing to mitigate that?
So when we first started the platform, when we had, we still have a lot to learn, but this is back then when we didn't even know what a like search firm was. It was like a free for all, right? So truly the concern around, I think a lot of the concerns in the early days when it was more of an open platform, I think maybe still is there, but we really want to clarify, like we're kind of like redesigning the like website for the recruiters, and we really want to clarify like that is not the case. I think I can see how one of the biggest doubts when you go on a platform is, oh, I'm going to compete with 100 other recruiters. It's just going to be kind of like, it's kind of like losing battle. That is not how we run things. I mean, just mathematically speaking too, like it's not a good decision for us. Like you don't want to create a platform where there's one winner and 99 losers. That's just like not a good thing to do, like in general, like not just for the recruiters, but also for the business, right? So we would never do that. Like you're not competing with 100 recruiters per role. And I think we should do a better job clarifying it. I think in fact, like we have a lot more transparency than I think most other platforms or similar concepts, right? I know there was like bounty jobs back in the day and things, but I mean, we show the pipeline, how many candidates are actually interviewing and where they are. How long has the role been live? What is the average response time to the hiring manager? These things like, I guess like are not like obvious things to show. Like maybe on one hand, if you're too short-term thinking, it might be like, oh, you know what? Let's like hide this from recruiters so that, maybe we can like take advantage of their time in sourcing. But very quickly you realize like that's a very short-term way to think about this, right? Like very quickly recruiters are going to be like, this is not worth, right? So transparency is key. And we're trying to, show more and more and more. I think a tricky thing is, I would say right now, it's roughly per head count, like I think on average it's like 3 recruiters per one role. And I don't think, and it depends, like sometimes it's like exclusive, sometimes it's like 5 depending on the difficulty of the role. But I really don't think it's more competition than market standard. I mean, even like the clients, most recruiting agencies have worked with multiple recruiters. Like I don't think it's like, I want to debunk the fact that it's actually more competition, because I truly don't think it is. And if anything, it's trending downwards. Like we're trying to trend more towards like, how do we efficiently allocate the right amount of recruiters to the right role, such that like most recruiters win and most roles get filled. One of our metrics aren't just the number of hires we make. One of the metric is how many new recruiters make their first hire this month. Like you can't hit that metric by putting 50 recruiters on one role. So that's one thing I really want to like debunk. That is like not the case. A tricky thing about like sharing the exact number of firms and recruiters, like we thought about it and probably one day we might, but the tricky thing about that is there are recruiters who are like, hey, I have one candidate in my network, like can I submit them? Like that's a very different thing to like having one firm working on it on like a sourcing basis, right? So thinking about capacity and thinking about like what actually the numbers are, I think is going to be very, very important. And that's why I thought the actual pipeline of how many people are in the interview process is actually a lot more accurate than just saying you have like X amount of recruiters, because you know, who knows what the involvement is, right? But yeah, I mean, we're always talking to recruiters, and you know, if anything, transparency like is so important. Like we always try to do more. So always welcome with suggestions and feedback. Yeah.
Gotcha. I love how in depth you guys go on like that focus on the individual recruiter, because it sounds like from what you're describing and from our own experience on the platform as a recruiter there, like the experience really is second to none. And I really do appreciate that. But my next question for you, John, is, recruiting is very niche centric, right? You have a lot of recruiters who like to stay in their lane of I recruit XYZ type of roles, or I only recruit in this area, this region, things like that. And so I'm curious from your perspective, from where Paraform started to where it is today to where, is going in the future, what have you guys been doing to be able to provide this service, this marketplace for recruiters who traditionally might not find their types of roles on, splits platforms or other marketplace type platforms?
Yeah. So I think specializing and choosing your niche is generally a good tactic to start off, because it's much easier to build. It's kind of similar to how we think about it, or how marketplace platforms think about it, right? Like recruiters are kind of their own mini marketplace too. And I think like if you specialize, what that does is it builds up a candidate pool that like, and they kind of like increases your time to fill in that area. And like you can kind of like build a nice like reputation and brand around it. So I think choosing a specific niche is like a very good thing to do as a recruiter to get your business off the ground. I'm sure Preston knows a lot about this too, but yeah, like that is, I think, a very good tactic. However, I also think the best recruiters actually can be good at all roles with enough time, right? I think like, recruiting is very soft skills driven. That's why there's like such a big gap between really good recruiter and really bad recruiter, right? I think like once you pick the right niche, I feel like expanding your practice to be like, hey, I'm going to focus on this niche too and that niche, and almost like seeing what comes your way and expanding that way, I think is like the best way to think about it. In general, the platform does encourage that too. So, like we have a lot of like interesting data that will help you and every recruiter much better, right? So, for example, we like recommended to a recruiter because her interview rate for non-engineering roles were actually like much higher, and like how far the candidate makes in the process and the speed in which the candidate moves, like all these metrics just like were really good. But she was a technical recruiter her whole career, and we're like, hey, actually you're very good at these generalist like operations and go-to-market roles for startups. Fully pivoted to that and been crushing it. I think she made 4 placements last month, right? Nice. So it's like, so I think it's like a kind of balance, but I think to start off, choosing your own niche is very good and will absolutely help you pick that, because we have so many different niches to focus on Paraform.
I agree with you. But after a certain point, if you can technically recruit one position really well, you can technically recruit any position really well. Exactly. But that's assuming you have access to the right information to help you do effective searches, right? Exactly. And so I think you guys have that in mind, which is super cool. If we can, John, quality, right? So I'm sure as much as you guys are making sure you're not accepting any random recruiter on your platform, I'm sure the same also goes on the quality side too. So for example, to contextualize it to agency owners, like we can always work with many different types of companies directly, but we're always going to prioritize the ones that are like the best, the tier number 1, tier A. So what are you guys doing to gatekeep that? And also like, what are you doing? Do you guys also do like real-time auditing with clients and candidates? And are you also like standardizing things? So like when you onboard a new company and let's say, everything matches, the salary matches, the role matches, like everything sounds good. But then they're like, hey, John, our interview process is actually like 20 stages.
Yeah.
Are you guys going to be like, great, but like, this is not ideal. You should, follow the typical 3 to 5, right? Do you do that behind the scenes? And And do you try to like, do whatever you can to kind of make sure that if a company comes on, they remain in good standing, but they're also just practicing best practice or even better, so we can, if conversations happen, that we can kind of accelerate interviews and ultimately offers happening on both sides?
Yeah, great question. And these are the things that exactly like we like learn from our users. Like I feel like we won't be where we are today if we didn't know how to work well with recruiters. I think like so some of these things are interesting because these are the learnings by talking to our own users who, like just experienced a lot of this in their career. And we like soak that in, turn that into features, things like that. But just to answer your question, yeah, quality is everything to this marketplace. Recruiting can very quickly get noisy. I think it's like interesting. Recruiting is always like a power law curve. There's like an inverse like of like, oh, how many like really great talent there is. Like the number of that is obviously smaller and smaller as you go. And like, right. So it's always going to have a lot of a noise both on the recruiter, candidate, and company side. Right. So to combat that, we actually, manually vet every single recruiter that applies to join the platform. And we have a very low acceptance rate. And that's not to say like, hey, I don't want to like gatekeep opportunities for people. I just don't think sometimes it makes sense. Like, we have really good like healthcare recruiters come, like they do like travel nurses, things like that. They're really best in their game. Like I looked them up. They're really good, but it's just like, unfortunately, like not the right fit, right? It's just like not like, I don't want to waste their time either. Right. So it's like, we have like and also we're planning on expanding to different industries and things like that. So we have like it's not really like a rejection. It's more of a wait list. And then we actually like, ask you like, hey, in the future, will we have these roles? Like we'll bring you on, right? Things like that. But yeah, absolutely. We have a very low acceptance rate to get on the platform. And even after that, there's like a lot of quality control, right? So yes, like your questions around, is there real-time auditing towards the general candidates on the platform in the ecosystem? Is that high enough? What is our average interview rate? What's really cool about Paraform is even though in 2024, the average submissions per recruiter, I think on average, one recruiter submitted like 3.8 candidates in January 2024. And in January 2025, it was like 16 or something like that. So it's like, it grew a lot, right? Like how much recruiters actually use the platform, but the quality of how many of their candidates get selected for an interview actually increased as well. You would think it decreases, right? But the volume going up. And that's like something we're very, very proud of. And I think we designed systems to make sure the quality is, controlled, right? Like you guys know all the features we have. Another thing is, qualifying demand. I think we learned that from our recruiters as well. In the early days, we were just like, oh, we just wanted to help people. So they're like, hey, you want to hire? This is what you want. Okay, like come to us, we'll get it done, right? But very quickly we realized like, the environment to do the search has to be set up right? For example, like if they have 20 steps in the interview process, we have to be able to tell them that's going to hurt your chances and why they actually have 20 interview steps, right? And we actually are actively adjusting those things. We're actually getting really good at like salary as well. Like people often don't realize that like even just the plus or minus 10K in your range, which often most of the time they do anyways with negotiation, it opens up a lot of the pool, right? So, we obviously have our strategic projects team that you guys work a lot with, we're doing that a lot, right? And even our sales team is like qualifying demand. Like, of course, we want to work with the best companies, but we also want to make sure that they're set up, like basic things like, do you have a JD ready? How long have you been recruiting this role for? Like, what other methods did you try? Why did it not work out? Like, it's not just like sales. It's an approach of, let's get this search done together, right? So I think that side is getting much better. Of course, even with that, there are things that happen post-launch of the role that we need to figure out, right? So a lot of the times, like checking in after the first round of interviews, like, being very prescriptive with the feedback they give to recruiters, integrating with as much of their recruiting systems as possible. Things like that, I think really accelerate, I think quality. And I think it can only get better. Like I want to, even with millions of companies and billions of candidates on our platform, which we want to achieve very quickly, I want to make sure that the quality is as good as it is now and better.
That's awesome. And how do you make sure the hiring managers on your platform are taking Paraform seriously? Like, do you have an understanding with them saying, hey, use Paraform as your primary channel recruiting hiring? Or do you also assume that like, they'll be on Paraform, but they're going to still go through their network. They're still going to have their own TA team, do their own outside sourcing, right? And then if they do that, what if they find another candidate and they just stop using, they become essentially inactive on Paraform? Do you just then remove them? Like, how does that?
Yeah. So
how does that work behind the scenes?
There's a lot of, account management tactics that we can use to make sure that side is good, right? But honestly, what trumps all is, I think, the quality of candidates, right? If they see that, Paraform recruiters are able to give them the best candidates, very quickly we realize like their engagement and, their repeated use, so like putting new roles up, things like that, increase significantly. Them being able to get good candidates is a two-way street. That's like a big learning, right? It's actually not a one-way street where it's like, oh, the recruiters just should send this good candidate. It's about, is your search and role set up well? well? And, is your expectation of what you can get and not, like, is that good? Do we take a very consultative white glove approach to that? And then getting the search right early, like the first 2 submissions, it has to be very, very good, right? So like we do a lot of things to make sure that's the case, and a lot of features built to make sure that that happens. And then I think, so that's paramount, right? Like organically, they should just love Paraform so much that it's a priority. Like anyone here could use all the tips and tricks to like convince them that it is, but at the end of the day, like, where are the candidates? Who are the, am I getting the best candidates? I think is the most important thing. And then there's like a series of account management tactics around like, hey, like, you have to review promptly. The reason why you actually have to give rejection feedback to recruiters is because it actually helps you down the road. Like there's a lot of these growth loops that we have with hiring managers that allows us to improve that. So one of the metrics we track is hiring manager response time, like length of their feedback. We even have features like on the requirements. I don't know if you saw, we actually, if a hiring manager interviews a lot of candidates, we have that data, right? And based on that interview data is inconsistent with their requirement. So let's say for like a account executive role, they put like top 10 school, just as an example. And if the last 5 interviews they did were not top 10 schools, we're like, hey, you should probably upgrade this to a nice to have or something. Like it's not a requirement, right? So we have all these like data powered feedback loops that both inform our, strategic projects team that help the companies in a very white glove approach, but also productizing that and making the loops better. So again, we have all these metrics and data that we use to track that. And I think that only helps recruiters make placements faster.
Real quick, what about managers that are too picky? What if users are truly setting the best of the best and then the hiring manager's
Good
like,
question.
No, and then it just goes nowhere. So are you guys gonna now, after a certain point, be like, hey, like you need to be more open-minded, or like nothing's gonna work here? So like, how do you have those conversations?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, I'm also sometimes, I think recruiters, I enjoy working with recruiters, but also like the bar at Paraform is difficult. So like a lot of recruiters ask us these questions as well. Like, oh, have you considered this and that? And I think from a hiring manager perspective, because we use Paraform to recruit, 60% of our team is from Paraform. It's like a big reason why we're able to hire so well, but also I'm a very active user and a hiring manager on the platform. I think when recruiters approach me with reason and data, I almost always listen. Like if I thought that the right title for this role is X and the right comp was this, but someone's like, hey, I met with this person at X company, this is what they want to contribute to your, whatever business, and like, but XYZ, like I actually like really listen to that and like make proactive changes. I also think it takes a little bit of like maturity as a founder or hiring manager or the business. I do think the problems we're discussing is very unique to early stage companies. I can definitely say like 1 year ago, I used to just be like, yep, like these goals, and without knowing what that actually meant, So I think it's actually a level of maturity that again, it's a two-way street with the recruiter. You have to be able to like really first principles think why you want that requirement. Who cares so much? Is it downside protection for like aptitude and IQ? Great. Like, you can test that with other things, and I actually also almost always value work experience over schooling, I think, and I think other things. But anyways, yeah, I think like it's just like a relationship that you have to constantly maintain. And I think I also would tell hiring managers to, like just it first comes from like self-reflection, like really understand like what you're looking for and like why, and then, come up with the requirements. It will save you a lot.
I just wish all hiring managers thought and had the same POV as you, but I can see perhaps if you are a very stubborn hiring manager Paraform, you might inevitably get.
And it also took me some time to get there. Like 6 months ago, I was like a lot more. Yeah, again, I think it's just like the maturity of like being a hiring manager and a founder. Like you kind of realize, I don't think our bar went down. I actually, in fact, think our bar went even higher. But we're a lot more aware of what we want, and those translate to more like nuanced, deep requirements that aren't traditionally like just bucketed to like the standard things you guys always see, right?
Yeah, I can see really picky hiring managers getting emails from Paraform saying, please improve your maturity. To be in better standings than there, you are not mature enough to use Paraform. I know we're short on time, and we can talk so much more about this, but I really have 2 questions, actually 2 more. Number 1, I just want to go back to what you said about the future of recruiting and how a lot of people, unfortunately, in tech, Silicon Valley, have this belief that like recruiters are just gonna disappear. And it's kind of a no-brainer for someone like me who's been a recruiter, and you can kind of look at similar industries like what's happening in real estate agents. They also freaked out too when AI came onto the picture. Why do you think it's so difficult, or why do you think a lot of people kind of share that same thought where, they just want to get rid of recruiting and recruiters, and that's where AI is going?
Yeah, I think in tech, like, there's like a chronic, cycle of mistakes where people don't actually deeply understand like an industry or profession or whatever enough, a problem deep enough. And it's sort of like from an outside point of view, like, oh, it takes up a lot of time, it costs a lot of money, therefore therefore we should automate it. And obviously, like, fundamentally, most people are software engineers. That's kind of how you think usually. But like you said, very quickly you realize if you go deep into this industry that it's like one of those, in fact, probably impossible, but one of those last things that will get replaced, right? I think with AI, obviously that is like the elephant in the room and what's going to change, the economy the most and how we live and work. So definitely acknowledge that. And I think what's going to happen is, I think commoditize, displace a lot of the more very manual labor that maybe humans actually should not be doing. For example, like I saw like a demo of like a robot doing like cleaning. Like that would be nice, right? Like to not like clean your house and fold your clothes. Like that would be nice, right? Or like basic level of accounting, or maybe even software engineering. You look at companies like Cursor and Windsurf, like, it's just incredible like how much they can actually take off our plates, right? And I think there will be a massive displacement, to be honest, in professions that actually get impacted a lot. And I know that's very scary for the economy and the people, but I almost want to look at it at a more positive note. Like, I think there was like a profession back in the day where when cars first came out, there was not only the driver, but also there was this one role, I forget what it was called, but they had to like switch something and they had to be on the car. And very quickly as the engines evolved, like they got completely replaced, right? But humans have always been able to figure it out. I feel like, yeah, like, I mean, sure, like it might get, in the very short term, it might be a very difficult thing to process, but I think like we've always been able to figure out, and there's going to be always new economic need. It's just an evolution rather than like, oh, we're doomed. So I actually think we should look at it very positively, thinking like, hey, like we as humans can do things that are more higher leverage, important and enjoyable being done by AI, right? I think that's a good thing. But there will be a movement where less people will be able to do more. That's just like gonna happen. In parallel, I think the GDP will increase massively, right? We're about to enter an economic renaissance and just like the next level of software evolution. Like we're gonna be it's incredibly exciting, the amount of like economic value that will be created. When you combine those two trends together, you kind of enter and the average salary goes up, right? I think like in an era of like 6-figure salary, and we've been that way since maybe our parents' generation to now, I think the average salary being 7 figures is actually like not too far away. When you have like less people doing more, GDP going up, like that's going to be the trend. And when that happens, recruiting is going to be even more competitive, even more relationship driven, even more human, and it's going to be more scarce. There's just going to be more scarcity. And when that happens, usually when there's scarcity, the value of a broker goes up. Recruiters are the brokers of human capital. I think let's just call it a transaction, each hire, each transaction, like if you compare it to a real estate market or whatever, I think recruiters are going to be much more like sports agents or real estate brokers in the future than, what they are now. And I think they're going to be even more high impact. Like, knowing the best candidate, having a great relationship with them, and being able to offer the very selective amount of opportunities, each hire will be worth so much more to a company. It will be a more significant event. And I think in that world, the value of a recruiter actually goes up. Also, I think it's not just about like asking a set of questions and recording their answers or, testing their technical skills. Like that stuff, I think, yeah, maybe AI can do, or lead code, things like that. But fundamentally, it's about, do you like the other person? What are the interpersonal dynamics that person is going to have with the rest of the team? Like these little nuances, it's just like really, really hard for AI to do. And I think it's an art. And I think we really like where we are today because as Paraform, because we are maximizing that ability of recruiters and doubling down on them, but also building really good technology. And you guys know we use a lot of AI. I mean, I think we use probably use AI in every single workflow, right? Like we're very pro AI, but that doesn't mean I think, it's about like replacing. I think the best AI companies actually build co-pilots, not autopilots, right? And then it kind of like moves to how does this industry evolve? I think we kind of have best of both worlds where we double down on recruiters and continue to see that trend play out, but also build the best tools for them, get the best data, and then, make sure recruiting becomes more efficient. So that's our view on the future of recruiting.
And I appreciate that, John. And it really means a lot for a company to be building a platform, a marketplace that really believes in recruiters and really believes in recruiters has a role and value, not just now, but also into the future. And I know we're running out of time here, so I really, really appreciate your time. And perhaps we need to do a part 2 because there's so many other things I would love to dive in. But just for the moment, I really want to thank you so much for sharing a little bit more about who you are, your background, living in different countries, to how you got your first company acquired, to now building Paraform, which is just doing phenomenally, and just can't wait to see what you guys continue to do into the future and all the other industries that you kind of expand into and all the new recruiters and new companies you continue to serve on a bigger scale. Real quick before we let you go, John, if people want to reach out to you, how can they find you?
Yeah, I think, if you're obviously Preston with your audience, like, recruiters who, are thinking about like, going independent, running your own business or scaling your firm, whatever that is, if you're interested in Paraform, you can reach out at John at john@paraform.com. Over email is probably best. And, we can figure out how we can work together. Of course, companies that are hiring or, potential like candidates that want to join what we're building here, I also feel free to reach out. Excited to meet everyone. And yeah, I mean, thank you guys so much for your time. I love the questions. Always good catching up, Preston. And Ryan, great to meet you today as well. And yeah, had a really good time.
Awesome, John. It's been our pleasure, and we'll continue to root for you from the sidelines. But it's always great to meet founders who are bullish for recruiters and not ones that are just trying to get rid of us all, right? Because I think recruiters do have an important role in the marketplace, in the industry, and a lot of them are really great people around the world, just doing the best that they can, serving amazing talent and companies. So it's really great to talk to a founder like yourself that believes the same. So, John, have a great day. We took enough of your time. Keep you and your team, keep crushing it, and let's catch up soon.
Thank you, Preston.